Well, here we are again. We're going to listen while Barak reads us chapter 3 from his book 5. This chapter is called Child. Barak, anything you want to tell us about before you get started?
Great, thanks. So yeah, this is the third chapter, Child. As I had mentioned in the previous two, this is one of those interlacing chapters where I'm introducing pieces of the tapestry, corners of the room with that light bulb running around, like Ariel so eloquently put it last time. I think it's great. This is another corner of the tapestry chapter. So last time we introduced the first protagonist, if you will, which was Solace. This is going back to another random event in a random place on this world. And it's going to be unrelated to anything else, except that it's completely related to everything else. But we'll have to wait until we figure it all out.
Sounds good.
So that is what this is about. And I guess without further ado, I'll just go into it, right?
Get started.
Unless anybody has questions from last time or anything you want to clarify or what have you.
Not here.
Nope.
So many questions. We'll have to put it all together as we can.
Yep, that's how that works, right? All right. So 5, Act 1, Chapter 3, Child. And I love the fact that this is live, by the way. Anyhow. Hey, Ma, are we there yet? The young dwarf was hopping up the stairs from the hold as fast as his little stubby legs could carry him. At 3'7", he was exceptionally tall for a dwarf of 11. But the ship, like all ships, was built for the taller races, so the stairs proved a constant challenge. Dwarves generally had little use for ships. We are made of earth and stone, his father always reminded him, and too much water can wash it all away. But they sailed on the trip anyway. It was really important that they take the trip, although he didn't know exactly why it was so important. His father had done something remarkable for the clan, spoke to some humans or something, instead of just ignoring, sneering at, or insulting them. Turned out that these particular humans were some sort of delegation, and they had gotten lost, were worried for their lives, and so when his father helped them, they were very grateful. Humans were funny like that. They seemed to appreciate their very short lives in a way that belied their willingness to waste them on frivolities like war. Dwarves went to war too, of course, but it was not something they did unless they absolutely had to, usually to protect themselves from marauding orcs or goblins, or to ensure that their hill remained theirs. They preferred to stick to those hills or to tend to their tunnels, depending on the clan. These humans followed his father's directions and left, but a bit later came back with wagons full of various offerings. Then they had a council for 3 days and 3 nights with the clan elders. When the event concluded, his father was given the most important of tasks, to sail to the human lands in order to meet with the humans' clan leader, who was called King. While he obviously had no idea who King was, judging by the content of the carts, even a youngster like him understood that King must have been very rich. But to get there, they would have to sail by boat, across the big water that met the coastline, and which they had all sort of assumed was the end of the world. Naturally, not a single one of the dwarves knew how to swim. The idea itself was preposterous. Why would anyone want to do that? So it was something that they never really considered learning. Still, the humans promised them that their ships were strong and that the humans had made the trips back and forth many times before. It was on one of those trips when their guide, an elven scout, fell ill from the sting of an aphid and lost her mind. The group had taken a few wrong turns as a result, and that's how they ended up at the foothill of Clan Tallgrass. By the time the Trade Council ended, the elf had regained her clarity and was able to resume her guiding duties. After they departed, no one expected that the humans should actually be back, seeing as humans were fickle by nature. But several moons later, there they were, asking for his father and whether he was still set to join them. It was only then that his father finally spoke up and said that he didn't really want to take the trip. The clan elders soon impressed upon him that this was an opportunity to rise above his station, to become an elder himself when he came back. He would indeed be the clan's first Diplomat. This was a word the humans taught them that loosely meant a dwarf who would make trade with other clans and peoples without upsetting anybody, which was a sentiment that the dwarves appreciated. The upsetting part was, after all, the main reason they kept mostly to their own hell. So his father collected his family, and when the time came to depart, they made their way onto one of those big boats, flattening themselves with all their might against the center floor of the deck as the anchor was lifted and the ship rocked gently and started to glide offshore. It took nearly 2 full days for them to finally be nudged away from that spot, and even that only happened more because their bladders were at their bursting point than anything the humans did to convince them to move. He was the first to adjust. Being the youngest, he was the less afraid and the least nauseated of the 3 of them. On request from the tribe elders, he had sympathized well with his parents, fear of any water, let alone the big water. The humans called it ocean and implied inconceivably that there were more than one. They were given room in the center of the hold. This, they were told, would be the best place to travel in the vessel, as it would be the most stable and move the least, even if the waters turned a little rough. Which, the humans added hastily, was not going to happen because we are going to sail in high summer, see? And the water is always very, very calm in high summer. His parents were suspicious, but in the end, it turned out that the humans told the truth. The sun had already come up and fallen down 11 times since they set sail, and other than a bit of rocking, mostly at night, the ship was about as stable as a gentle mudslide in early spring. He would never tell his parents this, but after the fear had passed, he found himself enjoying the trip a little. Eventually, he became familiar with all parts of the upper deck, and even spent some time over next to the captain, where he usually stood behind the massive wheel that turned the boat, looking out to sea. The wheel was as big as he himself was tall, and he remembered thinking that it was only appropriate that you needed such a big wheel to navigate an ocean. Not, in truth, that there was very much to see. Mostly the sun's reflection on the surface of the water, which stretched endlessly in all directions. Occasionally, he would catch sight of some big fish playing and swimming in between the sail ships, but after the first few times, he stopped marveling at them. If anything, he admitted to himself, sailing turned out to be a little boring. For the life of him, though, he couldn't figure out how the sailors knew where to go. His mother turned towards him, her kind face warming up as she opened her arms to him. She was sitting against the big post, it was called a mast, he had been told, at the top of the stairs. That was as far as she ever allowed herself to go, after they had moved down to the hold. Soon, baby, soon. The captain just told us that we were within a day of port, she said, smiling. Cool, he exclaimed, and started running past her towards the bow. Please be careful. We don't know what the water will do. You know water is dangerous. It could turn on us at any moment. Don't worry, Ma. I'll stay safe, he shouted over his shoulder as he kept running. He reached the short, steep stairs leading up towards the bow and started climbing, using his hands to help him make it up each step. As he reached the top, he expected that one of the sailors who were always up there would help him up the steepest last stair, as they always did. But this time, it didn't happen. He pulled himself up to the top, then climbed on a box and stood on his tiptoes against the ledge, raising his head to look. The first officer was standing there too, paying no attention to him at all, his eyes instead fixed towards the distance. He followed the sailor's gaze. The sky ahead had a strange look to it. It was dark. Then in the distance he could see a flash. And then he heard it, a distant rumble, lightning and thunder. He looked up at the sailor, whose face seemed somber. Say, he heard himself speak up. Is there a problem? The sailor ignored him. He looked back at the dark patch of sky and, he wondered if his eyes were deceiving him, the patch seemed to be growing visibly. He'd seen storms before, but this was unusually big and fast. He moved closer to the first officer and repeated his question, a little louder. The sailor looked down at him. Not yet, boy. You should get down to the hold and tell your parents to go with you if they aren't there already. The sailor started to move before stopping and adding, as if remembering his audience. It could get a little choppy soon. They were huddled together in the hold for what seemed like hours. Still, it couldn't have been much past midday when everything suddenly became so much darker. The sunlight, which usually streamed in through the porthole, seemed to just disappear. Then the ship started rocking. Hard. They hurriedly tied themselves with a rope to the center mast, which made its way down to the hold. If this was the most stable part of the ship, he thought, he couldn't imagine what being anywhere else would be like. They felt the ship rock violently, then the frightening sensation of it jumping up in the air, only to crash land with a terrible sound a moment later. It creaked and it groaned. Next, they heard the muffled yet still terrifying sound of wood breaking, giving in to forces beyond its power to contain. Water splashed in from above. His mother screamed. They hugged closer still, and he could hear his father praying to Thor. When the end came, it did so without much fanfare. For a very long time, there had been flashes of lightning and the sound of rolling thunder, and the water splashing in every time the ship crashed down, and the sound of feet running above them, and of sailors shouting in the darkness. After a while, he found himself almost getting used to it all. Clearly, the humans were right. These ships were made to withstand a big storm, and it sure seemed like they would withstand this one, especially as eventually things started to ease down a bit. The ship was moving less violently, as if it were seeking to right itself in water that was a little bit less angry. A bit of sunlight came in through the portholes again. He could swear that he heard one of the sailors shouting for joy in the background, and he felt reassured that they had made it through safely. Even his parents let their death grip ease ever so much and let out a small sigh of relief. The explosion, when it came, took them entirely by surprise. Suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, the side of the hold made an awful groan, the kind of sound that he had never heard before. The sound of death, the thought leapt to his mind, unbidden. Then the ship shattered open, as if a massive claw was raking it from the outside. He wondered if it was one of those legendary sea monsters from the tales he was told in the nursery, but it soon became clear that it was just a huge rock. And as any dwarf will tell you, especially if you were an elf, there is no wood in the world that can withstand the wrath of stone. The ship split in two. His last thought before he drowned was that maybe learning how to swim wouldn't have been such a terrible idea, after all.
Damn. Was not expecting that.
Right?
My goodness. The first thing is, for me, is like you just went through a whole short chapter with a person who's dead now, or
Yes.
an elf who's dead, or a dwarf who's dead. And it'll be interesting to see how you tie that back in. Stream of consciousness right now. You captured what it meant to be that young and seeing things for the first time. The case in point, or the example of you must need a big wheel like that to navigate a big ocean, which actually aren't related, but a little kid would relate.
Yeah, that's how a little kid would think,
You
right?
captured that. Well done.
Thank you. Any other comments? I mean, I'm here for you.
Well, I think it's first of all, I'm just thinking, I'm wondering what Greg's feeling, because we've all been enjoying your reading to us over the internet and speaking to us in the camera, and it's been really captivating. And I can only imagine being there. It's got to be another level, like being at a live concert.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And I was lucky enough, this is my second time with being Brock's like sole audience member while he reads an excerpt. And it's engaging. You're not just down. I mean, I don't know if you all could tell, he's looking up, making eye contact with me. And I know that if there were 3 or 2, 4, whatever number of people in the room, he would do it for each person, which adds a lot. You know, when we're on the Zoom, you know, he looks up at you, but you guys didn't get that this time. I did. And it definitely is a different experience, much more of a performance art, much more of a performing thing.
Which is what I'm hoping.
And you're pulling it off.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right? This is
It
what I
makes a
wanted,
difference.
right? It's so hard to do this purely on Zoom. I can't even begin to tell you.
You know, what I just saw and heard didn't sound that much different from when we're on Zoom, but I got to engage, or you got to engage. But you're doing fine on Zoom too, right? I mean, don't think that it's not as well. It's not as captivating, but it's still there. I mean, you've heard my questions and you've heard, Ariel, other folks who comment after the Zoom. So it's still good. I'm sure these guys will say it. This is better here.
Yeah, it's very impactful. What's happened so far. So.
And intriguing. I mean, like, what the heck? I mean,
How dare I?
The kid just died.
How dare I tell you about this child and then
Yeah, you made me
often-
like him. With that childlike kind of quality thing.
Well, I hate to say that it gets worse or better.
Darker?
Right. There's because I read you one of the later, right, when we did the thing, I
Yeah.
read you one of the later chapters, and that's pretty dark too.
Not like, well, it doesn't end, of course, but I'm sure there'll be more. But yeah, it wasn't all, puppy dogs and rainbows.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
So that's part of the whole laying of the tapestry, right? So it's this whole idea that there are corners that I'm shining a light on because they're really important in the context of our story. But they're clearly also, they're not everyday occurrences, right? There's a meaning to all of this, and I promise you, it all connects.
Well, I have no doubt. But all of the other parts of what we've heard it's intriguing. Like, how the heck is he going to, and this one is even more so because they died.
Well, the being in the crystal died too. Remember, the world ended.
Yeah,
I'm like offing all my, So I don't know if you noticed this. I don't use names in these, like the heroes of these like interlacing event chapters that are not introducing the protagonists are never named. Stark wasn't
I was
named.
waiting for the name of this little kid.
Yep.
Didn't
Not named, and that's on purpose. So you will notice that happens in the next. There's two more like that, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to what would I do with what I've heard so far, story wise, but I'm not going to say it.
Well, still, they also continue to delight us with the very rich detail, pressing themselves to the ground with all their might, which, is like, they're not, they're not really, but they are. And we can feel the intensity of their emotion and that descriptor. It kind of really carries us along. I really appreciate that.
And also doing it for almost like 2 whole days without going to the restroom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. How exhausted you would end up being in that sort of situation.
Yeah, well, humans can't do that.
But dwarves can. They're very
Obviously.
stubborn.
That's like one of those like leaps of faith conclusions. Oh, I wouldn't be able to do that. So dwarves must be different.
Yeah. Well, it's clearly now right? There was a tip that a friend of mine gave me a while ago about show don't tell. I think it's a standard tip in literature, right? So I could tell you the dwarves were stubborn, and I could show you that dwarves are stubborn.
Yeah. Well, that's part of that imagination thing where readers or listeners are left to make their own conclusions based on, oh, okay, so they're different than us.
Yep.
Without you saying that. Which is one of the magical things about books and not movies, right? I mean, that's the difference because somebody could read a book, two people read the same book and they'll have different imagination experiences. Whereas a movie hands it to you.
Right. You can't imagine in a movie for the most part.
It's not needed.
So it's right there.
The
It's
visuals
super
right
visual.
there. Yeah.
Right.
But this, you
Well,
get all different visuals.
It doesn't play well on Zoom, but just I keep finding myself wanting to close my eyes and picture what's happening, right? And especially on the ship, as you're going through the waves and through the dangerous parts, it's those are those areas that I really look forward to as we go chapter through chapter. But it also really feels like those pieces, like those kind of chess pieces that you were talking about, are being laying. They're being put on the board, but we don't see the whole board yet. So I'm eager for the next piece.
That's for sure. I mean, that's for sure that we don't see it yet. And like I was saying, there's a bunch of myriad possibilities, but Barack's going to take us on the trip. And
Right.
it also makes it's intriguing how you're going to do that. It's kind of, it does remind me a bit of that, like the Peanuts when Snoopy was writing, it was a dark and stormy night. And there's all these things. And then he said, in the next chapter, I'll tie this all together.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. Thank you. I'm honored, by the way. That's
Yeah.
first Stephen King, no Snoopy. I'm absolutely bursting with joy right now.
Well, now with the people, like, you know, kind of, it was getting darker a little bit, and it really was a surprise, like almost heart wrenching when he drowned. Okay, wait, you just made me like this kid and feel for him and
Good.
that kind of stuff. It reminds me a bit of the Stephen King, the gunslinger thing, where like there are other realities than this, and then the kid dies. And it's somewhat similar to that, pulling it together. I want to see if you I'm not going to say where I would take it. I want to wait till you do.
Oh, you feel free to say. And you know, I mean, you guys.
Well, when like, you know, the physical stuff dies, and I don't believe that we're not going to encounter this being or whatever it is again in your stories. Like, are you going to pull it together as some sort of collective consciousness? Are you going to have different physical being, but it's an individual consciousness? I don't know. There's a lot of places you could take it.
Right. I do think that where this is headed will also catch you by surprise. So it's
I have no doubt.
it's not a thing that so here's the thing, right? My background, right, as a fantasy science fiction nerd and all that. I had a period where in my teenage years where, you know, I read a lot, and I was also speed reading. So I was reading, I don't know, 200 books a year, all fiction, fantasy, what have you. Perhaps the pace lowered a bit afterwards, but that's where my education comes from. And all the books that I've read, which include, like, I won't say all the classics because there's way too many of them, but a lot of like the well-known stuff and so on. The fundamental story is not one that I necessarily recall. So it's you know, it's somewhat unusual in that respect, I think. I mean, I'm sure that to some degree somebody can come up and say, oh, well, you know, that's like a blah blah blah, and I'm like, oh, you know what, you're right. When I was 16, I read that book. And
Are you talking about like your influences?
no, I'm saying what is happening in this story is not that it has things that, you know, are familiar to all of us. But for example, the point you just brought up, when all will get revealed much later in the book as to why I included the story about the child that you really care about and I just killed.
Yeah.
Right. I think it might actually surprise you.
It might actually what?
Surprise you. Oh, it might actually be like you know, oh wow, this is surprising, and I haven't heard it before. That sort of thing. That's my big proclamation here, right? That's my big bet, right? That it would feel new.
Well, I'm looking forward to finding out. Barak, that was quite entertaining, and it really has left us looking forward to this fourth chapter. I'm looking forward to what else you can weave for us.
Okay. Well, thank you. And it is coming, and the fourth chapter is called 2, because it's the second protagonist being introduced, Lormek, Lormek, the healer. And see you in 2 weeks.
Maybe on the inside jacket of the book, you can have a flow chart of the chapter names and who the.
Well, actually, so okay, all right. We got to do this, right? So because I already have, and again, this is a little bit of the fantasy nerd in me that has read too much of the Lord of the Rings and all the adjunct books and what have you. But there's already like a page or two at the beginning of the book where I'm writing in places that are named, you know, items of interest, important characters and minor characters, and, you know, timelines and events and how people are related. So it's kind of all getting built up.
Good. Some kind of reference material to look back on.
Right.